Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast. You're in the right place if you're a growth-seeking being who acknowledges the challenges and delights of your humanity on the path to an ever more conscious life. If you want to feel inspired to love and accept yourself, to feel free to be and express you in all your brilliance, if you want to truly value yourself and others and feel energized and alive both at home and in the world, then sit back and take a breath as you explore and grow the brilliance of your beautiful human self with your host, the father of non-personal awareness and creator of the MPA process, Joel Young.
Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. This is episode 29. Welcome if you're brand new. I've loved that you found me or found this show. Hope you enjoy it. There's lots of stuff to go back to and listen to if you want to do some binge watching. Much higher value than Netflix, methinks. And welcome back. If you're a regular, you know I always appreciate that you choose to spend this time with me, listening to my pontifications, which I hope, again, brings you tremendous value. So if you haven't already subscribed, make sure wherever you're listening to this podcast, you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified of when these episodes come out. They come out generally every week on a Tuesday, sometimes early in the morning and sometimes like today, a bit later in the day. Depends what's going on in my life. So this week I'm going to give you a shout out goes to Heather. Now Heather's a client of mine and she told me today, it's made me laugh, that she really loved my story about my lockdown birthday experience and thought that my girlfriend's idea of wrapping and revealing presents in her lingerie on FaceTime was genius. And Heather said she'd note that idea for herself. Well, as far as I'm concerned, any way that this podcast inspires you at all is a win for me. And if that's got your curiosity piqued, then make sure you go back and listen to episode 27. All the episodes, by the way, you can find, and you can find the show notes for them. You just need to go to www.beabrillianthuman.com/episode number. So that would be /27. And for today's episode, it would be www.beabrillianthuman.com/29. And if you'd like a shout out, just let me know how this podcast or any particular episode touched you. You can email me, message me, or comment on social media, or leave a voice message directly on the Be a Brilliant Human website. There's a big purple button on every page. It says leave a message. Click that. You can go through and leave a voice message for me. On social media, you'll find me at Joel Young NPA. For the most part, on YouTube, it's just youtube.com/Joel Young. And where else? Oh, yes, email. You can email me, joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. Just get in touch. And I'd also love to know how you're doing in this lockdown. How's it going? It's been a while now. At least us in the UK, I think we're in week 3 now. So cracking along. Who knows how long it will go on for. Anyway, I'm always open to hearing from you. So if you'd like me to cover a topic or you have a question or just want to share something, just get in touch. So what's on the cards for this episode? Well, if you remember, back in episode 28, that's last week's, I told you about that there was a social media question I asked. I just put out this question on social media. I asked, what's the biggest issue that's coming up for you during lockdown and all that's going on with COVID-19? So last week I covered trust, which came up in response to that question. But another big theme, was the issue of feeling controlled. So today we're going to run a similar format to last week, but this time I'm going to be looking in depth at the idea of control and specifically help you take a conscious look at how you respond to authority, answering the question, what's your authority response? So I've kind of identified 3 different authority responses. 3 that could get you in a pickle and 1 that will give you a sense of freedom. So kind of 4 in total. So I'll share those and I'm going to walk you through how you can adapt the 3 exercises that I shared last week when we were looking at trust. But this time we'll look at how to use them to help you feel more empowered in the face of authority. So, those control issues don't stress you out and define your lockdown experience. Now you might be thinking, well, I'm no rebel. I don't have control issues or authority issues. Well, let me tell you, my friend, when it comes to self-empowerment, authority and control issues, They're not just for the rebels, because sometimes authority and control issues manifest as an unwillingness to or discomfort with standing in your own authority. In other words, passiveness can be as much of an authority issue as rebellion. Now, because I'll be using those same exercises as we did last week, you'll need to download the sheets if you haven't already. So you can get hold of the MPA processes both for free, and you can get them both in the show notes at beabrillianthuman.com. So the MPA process you'll need, and also the unconditional pivot exercise, which I did a full mini training on in episode 27. So this is going to make a lot more sense to you today, at least the second half of it is, if you've got those downloads and those sheets in front of you. Of course, if you know MPA inside out, if you're one of my regulars who've done MPA, then that's going to be all good. And if you haven't found out about MPA, again, if you go back and listen to last week's episode, I give a fairly detailed instruction on the MPA process, so you can get caught up to speed there before you do today's exercise. Sound good? Well, let's crack on. Okay, so right off the bat, if you're feeling controlled, you have by definition put somebody or something in a position of authority. And, external authority by its very nature, it sort of causes us to encounter our vulnerability. So why is that? Well, the definition of authority, according to dictionary.com, is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. So when you place someone or something in a position of authority, you're handing them this power. And that, by definition, again, puts you in a position of vulnerability. So here's the thing. So external authority, it's a fact of life, right? And it isn't intrinsically bad. I mean, we simply couldn't function in our society without delegating authority. So, we are interdependent creatures. And in this world, we constantly allow others to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience on our behalf. And if you doubt that, if you're thinking, I don't, I never do that, I wouldn't do that, then ask yourself, do you ever go to the supermarket? Do you go online? Do you pay your taxes? Do you own a car? Do you pay your energy bills? Do you obey any laws at all? Do you? Tell me you obey some at least. Because there's a chain of orders, decisions, and obedience behind each of those things, all of which you have sort of intrinsically delegated. So really the key question when it comes to issues of authority, power, and control is, what is your relationship to vulnerability? What's your relationship to vulnerability? Now, this isn't a black and white thing, because there's context to be considered. Again, I talked about context a lot last week in relation to trust issues, and that also clearly holds true here. But again, in the interest of not overly repeating myself, if you're interested in finding out more about context and why it's important, listen again to, or go back to episode 28, because I go in detail there. But getting back to vulnerability, warning, I'm about to use a generalization, but think of this as a pointer that will sort of hopefully invoke insight for you. So the clues to your relationship with vulnerability can be found in your childhood. If you think about it, the first authority figures we have are our parents, right? And childhood, especially early childhood, is a time when we are, again, naturally vulnerable. We don't have the tools to take care of ourselves, certainly not in this society anyway, or generally, especially when you're a baby, right? And to continue the generalization, it's fair to say that if we were able to rely on our parents to take, or if you're able to rely on your parents to take care of your needs, especially at the most vulnerable times, then you'll be more likely to trust authority. Now, if during your greatest times of vulnerability, your parents were unreliable or even downright unhelpful or dismissive, then chances are you're more likely to distrust authority. And the other thing is, if your parents took care of everything, to the point where you really never had a chance to confront or face the responsibilities of life as you grew up, then this could swing in the completely opposite direction, and your trust of authority could be unquestioning. And that in itself has its own pitfalls. So, and these tendencies are generally true because authority issues are a matter of projection. In other words, we tend to project the imprints from our childhood experience onto authorities in adult life. So, the parents, in quotes, become the government or the boss or the guru or any other person or organization that we perceive as some kind of authority. And these projections, they can be both blinding and binding. So if you're stuck in an unconscious projection that causes you suffering when you encounter authority, the key to setting yourself free from them, and coming into your own authority without bias is awareness. Now, presence, awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, brings you into a state of neutrality. Because projection is a state of polarization, and polarization causes charge, and charge causes attachment. And this isn't freedom. And I've noticed that people will fight tooth and nail for the validity of their projections. Well, neutrality, on the other hand, is a frictionless state that allows movement and flexibility to respond to the context of the moment, and to kind of your dynamic inner truth, unclouded by the filters of your history. So when you can stand in neutrality, inner centeredness and alignment floats naturally to the surface. And from there, you can always access your sense of inner power, your free will, and your sense of control. So because it starts with awareness, I've broken things down into 4 easy to follow or easy to sort of grasp categories, which I'm calling your authority response. Now, as I said in the intro, the first 3 are projection-based and the 4 is awareness-based. And in essence, what I'm encouraging you to do here today, or to aim for, if you find yourself falling in any of these first 3, is to sort of aim for that 4th one, which is the awareness-based one. Now, you might find as we go through them that one is sort of more your general tendency, but bear in mind that there may be contexts where you tend to fall into another authority response. So maybe it's response 3 most of the time, but occasionally you have the awareness one, and sometimes you fall into number 1. So just bear that in mind. And I also want to remind you that, all of these behaviors, they sort of focus on the behaviors, have a place where they are context appropriate. And one of the key things here when you're going through these things is not so much, about if you follow that behavior, but are you expressing this behavior as a response from a place of projection or from a conscious awake choice that you're fully congruent with. And right now, we've got a brilliant example. The governments, of most of our countries are asserting their authority with the lockdown order. So looking at your response to that could give you a good way to get a read on what your authority response is. So what are the 4 authority responses? So first up, we have passive obedience. So this is the response of blind compliance. There's no discernment or questioning going on here. So going back to the childhood experience, this tendency is more likely to be a set point for you if your parents were, and I'm using big air quotes here, over-caring. So to give you an idea of where this might be contextually appropriate, is like if you're using the internet. So unless you're a hacker or a programmer or some kind of full-on tech geek, then the chances are you don't really care much about the who, the how, and the what of the technical magicry of what makes the internet tick or makes it work. So you're happy to follow the rules without question, as long as you can just send an email, log on to Facebook, and Google the best smoothie recipes. You're cool with that. But when passive obedience comes from an unhealthy projected place, it has the flavor of discomfort, sort of an unwillingness or fear of stepping into your own authority. So the unconscious inner dialogue will be on the lines of, I don't have any idea what to do. Remember, this is kind of unconscious. You might not be consciously aware of it, but I don't have any idea what to do. And I don't feel safe making my own decisions in this situation. Whereas the outer expression might be, well, we all just need to trust the government right now. They know what to do and they have our best interests at heart. Now, just to be clear, that may or may not be the case. I'm not making a comment on the good or ill intentions or the competence of governments here. But what's useful is shining a light on any sense of inner disempowerment or lack of self-trust that you might have, so you can then move to greater states of inner well-being, where it really matters. I mean, for example, this could be a trap in relationships. So the passive obedience responder can perceive positive intent where it doesn't exist. For example, staying in an abusive and controlling relationship. He only beats me because he cares. I mean, that's an extreme example, but, it can go there. All right, number 2 is resentful obedience. So, where there's some questioning, but an inability or unwillingness to step into your own full authority and power, we can get seduced into the trap of buying a false sense of power, which can manifest as resentment and inaction. So, like passive aggressive delays and indirect complaining are kind of the hallmarks of this projective response. But underneath it is a fear of your own power. It's also a fear of punishment and rejection. If you don't ultimately toe the line, you'll be rejected or punished. And it has a flavor of dissatisfaction and it can come with a sense of your own inauthenticity. So I was thinking about this. I'm not really sure there's a context where this is ultimately a healthy or appropriate response. But awareness is particularly useful here because when you spot that kind of resentful behavior, then you have an opportunity to look at look your sense of powerlessness and fear in the eye and start making choices that bring you into alignment and satisfaction. Number 3, then, the third of the projective responses is reactive rebellion. So again, going back to childhood, if your parents treated you badly, or were not there for you when you were vulnerable, that might have installed a general mistrust of or even anger, or often anger, at authority. So people who live here are often, I've noticed this, often strongly identified with their behavior. So you hear things like, I'm different, the rules don't apply to me, or even fuck authority, I do what I want when I want. And they'll claim that, they're the free ones and the rest of you are just sheep. But reactive rebellion is not freedom because it's not a choice. At the first sign of authority, they'll go another way. And often with as little questioning as the passive obedient folk. That's it. It's just a reaction. It's a reaction, not a thought through thing. And if you're a reactive rebeller, to put that on it, and if I wanted to say white, what do I say? I say black, right? And you'll say white because it's opposition. So obviously that's an oversimplification, but you get the idea. So under the surface is a fear of conforming, of being controlled, and that distrust that anyone else could ever know better than you what the right response is. And the distrust in particular can lead, a reactive rebel to perceive negative intent where there isn't any, in which case you're going to put yourself in a hostile world where there isn't one, and that's a recipe for suffering. And let's face it, it's only going to add then to your sense of aloneness and vulnerability. So it becomes like a vicious cycle. And the fact that you unconsciously, and another way to say that is uncontrollably, have that inner fight against authority actually sponsors and affirms the very idea that others' power over you is a real thing and must be defended against. All right, so let's move into the more positive. So let's look at number 4, which is conscious self-empowerment. So this is the awareness-based one. So let's talk about what a conscious response without projection looks like. Well, my friend, this is freedom. So firstly, the behaviors from conscious self-empowerment might on the surface look like reactive rebellion or passive obedience or, at different times, but they're not that. The distinction is that your behaviors come from a conscious choice and you wholeheartedly stand in your decision to follow or to not follow, to agree or not agree, to obey or not obey. And you're not bound by an identity. So it doesn't say something positive or negative about you if you appear to follow the herd or if you're yet a lone wolf. Because you're not doing either blindly or reactively. Your choice of behavior is based on an honest inner check, based on context, inner alignment, self-responsibility, and social responsibility. You literally get behind your decisions and feel satisfied by them. And of course, you're willing and able to adjust as the context changes. So again, I'm encouraging you here to notice where you're trapped in projection-based responses and to move into conscious self-empowerment. Now, that journey is going to require a few things from you. Firstly, a willingness to be ruthlessly honest with yourself about where you're stuck in projection, along with the willingness to actually start your journey towards conscious self-empowerment. Now, the fact that you're listening to this podcast tells me I can be pretty confident that you've got that one down, that commitment to moving forward. And then you're going to need to get still, to halt that momentum of the projected response so you can come inside and inquire with neutrality. And you'll need a couple of powerful mindsets. I would choose wholeness and contextual awareness. So by wholeness here, I mean an openness to all possibilities and options without an agenda or the limitations of dogma. And contextual awareness is really about being aware of both the macro and the micro. So that's the big picture and the local details as well. And you'll need to be in a receptive state so that the answers, which are really your most appropriate responses in the moment, can find you. And then you'll need a willingness to act on them. Now, I call that inspired action as distinct from passive or reactive action. Okay, so the good news is that journey is actually embodied within the exercises that I'm about to share with you. So just like last week, we're going to be using the MPA process and the unconditional pivot exercise, and I've got some self-inquiry questions for you. Now, because I went into full detail about the unconditional pivot exercise in the mini training of episode 27, and again, as I said earlier, some detail about the MPA process in last week's episode, I'm just going to give you the basics today and tell you how we can tailor it specifically to work with authority issues. Now, if you haven't yet listened to those episodes, then I recommend you do that first. You can hit pause here. Most platforms will bring you back to the same place where you left off. And that way, again, what I'm about to share will make sense to you. And of course, make sure you download the MPA process sheet and the unconditional pivot exercise. Both are free. Both will be linked in the show notes for this week's show. And also they'll be in last week's show, so they're easy for you to find. And again, just so you've got it in case you're about to pause before you come back, the show notes for today are at www.beabrillianthuman.com/29. And if you want to go back to last week's episode about trust, it'll be the same /28. And if you wasn't listen to the whole of the unconditional pivot training, that is again /27. All right, so let's get into the exercises. Okay, so let's start with a quick review of some of the points that I made last week about these exercises. So, well, firstly, remember that one of the Be a Brilliant Human principles is that sustainable and fundamental change comes with practice and experience over time. So, while these exercises are all great interventions, to shift your state and, in a moment where that authority or the powerlessness issues hit you in the face, if these are things that affect you across your life, then I'm going to encourage you to take these on as a practice. So you repeat them over time to make this change sustainable and train it in. And these exercises are more about shifting your state than dealing with the practicalities or specifics of the situation that they arise in. But what I do know is that when you shift your state, your behaviors, your clarity, and your availability to act in more alignment tend to follow more sort of automatically. And last week I explained how trust in last week's case is an energy which you can tune into. And that means that the source is in you, or more accurately, you have independent access to it regardless of the circumstances. Now, that's also true of conscious self-empowerment or any other feeling state that reflects that for you. And finally, sort of coming into a state of empowerment and alignment is going to support and strengthen your immune system. That's always a positive, and perhaps even more so now. Okay, so let's start with MPA. So how can you use the MPA process to help you take that journey from a projected response to authority, to conscious self-empowerment? Well, okay, today we're going to use MPA both in its letting go of the yucky stuff and letting in the yummy stuff modes. So you'll start by letting go of the current issues you're experiencing around control and authority, and then you're going to let in the new, more empowered experiences that you'd like to have. So I'm going to give you a few options, so you can choose whichever way feels best for you, or ways. You can do many of them. And remember that the artistry of MPA is in finding the right cookie cutters. So make sure, to get the best of this approach, make sure that you gen up on how to do that. So again, make sure you download the sheet. And of course, if you want to get some of the training that you can get, you can use that as well. But here's what to do. So let's start. If you're inexperienced with MPA, you can use this simple approach. So you can start with this one. So decide which projected authority response most resonates with you. So that could be passive obedience, resentful obedience, or reactive rebellion. Now, again, I'm going to make the point that, you could find that you fall into different categories in different contexts. But find the one you can start. You can do many of them, but find the one that you most resonate with to begin with. Then use this setup question. So I'll use passive obedience for the example, and obviously you'll switch that out for whichever authority response you resonate with if it's different to that. So you're going to ask yourself, in relation to passive obedience, what am I experiencing that I would like to allow to pass? And then the response to that is to just let the answer spew out. You can spew it onto paper or into a voice recording app. You can listen back or read it back and notice which word or phrase pops out to you. And that's your cookie cutter, and you're going to run that through the process. Now, once you feel you're complete on that one, we're going to do the other side. So you'll ask yourself this question. So in relation to conscious self-empowerment, what am I not experiencing that I would like to allow to come? So again, because we're looking at letting in the yummy stuff, we're focusing there on conscious self-empowerment. And because that's the only one you've got as an option for the awareness, you're going to use that exactly as it is. So again, let your answer spew out, find your cookie cutter, and then run it through the process. And that is a very simple way for you just to give it a go. Now, if you have a little bit more MPA experience, or you're just up for the challenge, then here's what I do. Rather than using the labels that I've given you from the different authority responses, we'll find your own language for how you experience authority or control issues. So start by asking yourself the question, where in my life do I experience control issues, authority issues, or have difficulties with vulnerability? I'll say that again. Where in my life do I experience control issues, authority issues, or have difficulties with vulnerability? Again, just let your answer spew out, find your cookie cutter, and run it through the process. So again, you'll start by running that cookie cutter through the process, which is effectively letting it go. And then once you feel complete, you're going to ask yourself this question. In relation to, and you're going to use your cookie cutter, whatever that was, what would I like to allow to come? So let's say after my spew, the cookie cutter that I chose was angry and scared. I'd start by MPAing that, take it through the process, and then I would ask myself, in relation to angry and scared, what would I like to allow to come? Then I would spew in response to that, find a second cookie cutter, and run that through the process, effectively letting that energy in. Now, again, this will be the specific notes here will be in the show notes if you want to go find them. You don't necessarily have to write them down. Just go to the website. They're all there. And as ever, I'd love to know what you experience when you try this. So that's MPA. Next up, we're going to look at how you use the unconditional pivot exercise in this case. Well, I thought about this. To be honest, you'll probably benefit most from simply taking yourself through the entire exercise as is and simply focus on a sucky situation that represents whatever control issues you have. So anywhere where you express one of those projected authority responses, just start there with what's the situation, write it down, write the response. How would you feel if it was different? And just go through the process, all the steps in that way. And that would generally be my recommendation. But there is a shorthand way that I want to offer you. It might be helpful to try this. And here's what I do for that. So I'd write out a short paragraph that starts with, if I fully embodied conscious self-empowerment, I would feel. So that, in effect, is an alternative step 2 of the exercise. And from there, you can just follow the other steps through. So you'll be choosing only the self-focused feelings from your paragraph and running those words through steps 4 to 8. And again, let me know what your experience is. Again, notes for that will be in the show notes. So finally, I've got a few self-inquiry questions for you to use. Now, these questions are designed today to help you focus on alignment and find your congruence in the face of authority. And I've got 3 questions for you, and there's one, each of them hones in on one aspect of each of the 3 projective authority responses. So as I go through it, I'll let you know which authority response it relates to. I'll read out the question out. I'll repeat it to be sure that you catch it, and then I'll pause for a moment before moving on. That means that you can do it along with my voice if you'd like, or you can just hit the pause button after the question that you're using. And I'll read them out, directing the question to you. And in the show notes, I'll write them out in the I form, which will make more sense if you're doing it on your own later. So one note, these questions are phrased situationally. So they're designed for when you're kind of focused on a specific situation where you've noticed these issues arising. And remember that the secret to self-inquiry is being inwardly still and letting the answers find you. It's not about using your mind to go and seek the answers. And again, I'm a big fan of letting my answers just flow onto paper. So here we go. So we'll start just by taking a deep breath in, letting it out, just letting yourself become relaxed, alert, and still. So just listen to each question, be still, let the answer find you, and just write them down. So we'll start with passive obedience. What would trusting your own judgment look like in this situation? What would trusting your own judgment look like in this situation? And then moving on to resentful obedience. What are your true feelings about this situation? And what would it look like to really step into them? What are your true feelings about this situation? And what would it look like to really step into them? And then for reactive rebellion, what do you actually want? What do you actually want? Okay, so take a deep breath in, letting it out, just relax. Now, inquiry questions can bring kind of a variety of responses. So perhaps it's realizations and ahas that bring relief, or an awakening or realization, but they can also bring deeper issues to light. So if that's the case for you, especially with these questions, you can always take your answers like they're a spew and then use the MPA process to help you move through those underlying issues. So again, you just look over your answer, notice what pops out. That can be a cookie cutter, take it through the process. So a bit of a bonus way to use MPA there today. Okay, so that's it from me today. As ever, I do hope this episode has stirred you, touched you, and given you a perspective that helps you up your game in some form. And please do let me know what you experience as you try these exercises. Again, you can send me an email. It's joel@nonpersonalawareness.com. You can contact me via social media. You just comment or message me. You'll find me at Joel Young MPA in most places, and youtube.com/Joel Young for there. And of course, you can always leave me a voice message, feedback, or just ask me questions directly via the Be a Brilliant Human website. And as ever, if this stuff's brought stuff up for you, or you just want to get some one-on-one support from me, you can check out sessions with me. Go to joelyoungmpa.com/sessions. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. I do really very much appreciate that. Time is a precious thing. So I'm not underestimating the value that you spend like half an hour a week with me. It's a big deal. So I appreciate that. Remember to make sure you subscribe if you haven't. And if you like what you hear, go tell someone. And all that remains, my beautiful friend, is to cue the moo.